If you gather the authors of the New Testament into a single room and ask them one question, should Christians follow the Jewish law? You wouldn't get one answer. You'd get a shouting match. Most people assume early Christianity spoke with one voice. It didn't. The earliest Christian texts reveal 5 distinct positions on whether followers of Jesus were bound by the Torah, the commandments in the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Let's walk through each one. Let's start at one end of the spectrum with the Gospel of Matthew. According to Matthew's Gospel, Jesus never abolishes the Jewish law. He reinterprets it. He debates the Pharisees about how to observe the Sabbath, not whether to observe it. The disagreement is over method, not principle. Matthew's Jesus says explicitly, "Not one jot or tittle shall pass from the law until all is accomplished." That's about as strong a statement of Torah loyalty as you can find. For Matthew's community, following Jesus means following the law, all of it, but understood through Jesus' teaching. This is the far left of our spectrum, full observance. Not everyone in the early movement saw it this way. Luke and Acts take a notably different approach. They draw on a Jewish concept called the Noachide laws, minimal commandments God gave to Noah after the flood, considered binding on all humanity, not just Jews. Under this framework, Gentile believers don't need circumcision, Sabbath observance, or the full dietary code. They need to avoid strangled meat, blood consumption, idol sacrificed food, and sexual immorality. Luke treats the Jewish law as ethnic custom. Just as Romans have Roman customs and Greeks have Greek customs, Jews have Jewish customs. And Gentile Christians don't need to adopt them, and the law is respected but not universalized. This places Luke and Acts at the center left of our spectrum. The law applies to Jews as their heritage. Gentiles follow a lighter set of obligations. It's a diplomatic middle ground, one that respects Jewish tradition without imposing it on newcomers. But Paul pushes further. For Paul, it's not just that Gentiles don't need the law. Adopting it is spiritually dangerous. In his letter to the Galatians, he writes that Gentiles who seek justification through the law, that is, who try to be made right with God by following Torah, are cut off from grace. Paul never tells Jewish believers to stop keeping the law. That distinction matters. But for Gentile converts, Torah observance isn't optional. It's forbidden. This is centered right on our spectrum. Law forbidden for Gentiles. Now, what happens when someone takes Paul's logic and runs with it all the way to the end of the spectrum? That's Marcion. A 2nd century figure in Rome, Marcion pushed the Pauline trajectory to its extreme conclusion. He didn't just reject the Jewish law for Gentiles, he rejected the entire Hebrew Bible. He believed the God of the Old Testament, and the God who gave the law to Moses, was a lesser, inferior deity, not the true Father of Jesus. The God of creation and the God of salvation were, for Marcion, 2 completely different beings, and this wasn't a disagreement about practice, it was a total theological rupture. Marcion created his own canon, an authoritative list of texts he considered scripture. A canon is a formal list of books a community treats as sacred and binding. He's included only an edited version of Luke's Gospel and the 10 of Paul's letters. He physically removed passages that spoke positively of the Jewish God or quoted the Old Testament. And he may have been the first person in history to produce a formal Christian canon list, which pressured the mainstream church to define its own. But there were also voices pulling in the opposite direction. The Epistle of James reads as a direct rebuttal to Pauline theology. Paul argues that a person is justified by faith, not by works of the law. James fires back, faith without works is dead. Martin Luther was so troubled by this tension that he called James an epistle of straw. James sits near the full observance end of our spectrum, emphasizing that right action matters, not faith alone. One crucial point: these aren't sequential stages of development. Many of these positions existed simultaneously in different communities across the Mediterranean. Paul wrote in the 50s. Matthew and Luke composed their Gospels in the 80s. James is debated anywhere from the 60s to the early 2nd century. Marcion arrived around 140. So what do we make of all this disagreement? The completed spectrum tells the story. Matthew, full observance. James, near full observance with emphasis on works. Luke and Acts, law as ethnic custom. Paul, law forbidden for Gentiles. Marcion, total rejection of the Hebrew Bible and its God. The fact that these radically different positions all ended up within the same canon, except Marcion's, tells us something profound. The New Testament is not a single-voiced document. It's a library of disagreements. These debates shaped which books were included, how the Old Testament was understood, and whether Christianity would remain a Jewish movement or become something new. Marcion's extreme position may have accelerated the formation of the Orthodox canon, a case where heresy shaped orthodoxy. Diversity of interpretation is not a modern invention. It's baked into Christianity's DNA from the very beginning.